Good afternoon, and welcome to the 73rd edition of Ask the Governor. Every month since April of 2016, Governor John Bel Edwards has been with us. This is no exception. This week and this month, he is joining us remotely, but we're always eager to catch up with the governor. And if you have any questions, this is the time to get in. I see one line open, 877-217-5757. And as usual, we have a month to catch up on as far as news, and there is a legislative session that is ongoing. And Governor, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon, Jim. And obviously I'm not in the studio today, but the good news is that has nothing to do with COVID. That is a function of the fact that I was on an inspection train today that ran from Baton Rouge to New Orleans as we worked to reestablish, or to establish, I should say, passenger rail service to link those two cities, the two biggest cities in metropolitan areas in our state. And so we got off the train just a short while ago, and I'm taking the call from Benson Tower. But I did want to thank you and all the folks there at the network who make it possible for us to have this program and to do it every month. And it's hard to believe that it has been 73 months already.
That's right. So if you do it, we've been together 72 hours. That's 3 full days. 24 hours, 3 full days. Right. So the governor's done a lot of talking over the course of now, 5.5 years? 5 years ago today, or this month, he started this program, and he's always been ready to take any questions, and this month is no exception. And you mentioned the rail prospect. That's something John Spain from the Baton Rouge Area Foundation was on a program I host not so long ago, and he's quite optimistic. How's it looking?
Well, I am optimistic as well. So about 3 weeks ago, I had a Zoom call with the CEO of Canadian Pacific, which is in the process of acquiring Kansas City Southern. The Kansas City Southern CEO was on the call, as was the president of Amtrak and the administrator of the Federal Railroad Administration in the U.S. Department of Transportation. And I asked them, I made sure they understood what our goals were here around passenger rail, and not just in New Orleans and Baton Rouge, but with respect to New Orleans and Baton Rouge, I asked that we do an inspection train as soon as possible. And to be able to put that together in a matter of about 3 weeks and have all of those principles here today, riding that train, so that together, along with Sean Wilson, the Secretary of Department of Transportation for the state, we were able to visit for several hours about the process moving forward and how the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act has really set us up for success, and in the near term, which, by the way, will be important, not just to get people off of the interstate, generally speaking, and to help us meet our climate goals and to allow people to live in Baton Rouge and work or recreate in New Orleans or vice versa, go to the airport without having to drive and park your car in long-term parking and all the other things that it will help us with. It is going to also allow Baton Rouge and New Orleans to a greater degree to compete together as a super region against other places in the country and not compete against one another. So I'm excited about it. I think there's a path forward in the near term. And by near term, we really want to make sure that to the maximum extent possible, we get traffic off of I-10 before the restrictions happen that are going to happen in order for us to expand the capacity between the bridge and the split. And that'll happen in 2024. And so we're really trying to have everything in place that we can to mitigate against what will be increased congestion.
I'm sure you would like to do this before your term expires. So that's a year and 9 months. You think you'll get it done by then?
Well, I think we're certainly going to make the announcement. I would like to have the rail up and running, obviously, by then. That's about when it needs to come online if it's going to mitigate against the congestion that I just spoke about. But I have every reason to believe that we will be successful, and whether it starts during my term or not, it will start shortly thereafter. And, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done, and it certainly isn't automatic. But this is something that we have support for across the state. and the legislature supports it as well. And I'm working with them now because I think we need to have $25 million available to us for both capital expenditures, but also for operational dollars, in order to make sure that the FRA and the U.S. Department of Transportation, but also the private sector, knows how serious we are about this. I think the House most recently cut that number in half, but we'll keep working throughout the legislative process to get that restored, because I think it's that important. And Jim, I want all of our listeners in North Louisiana to know that we're also working with the same folks to try to make sure that there's passenger rail along the I-20 corridor too, because Dallas to Atlanta, connecting on up to Washington, D.C. and New York City, is also very important to the country. It will be very important to us as well, and many of the same players are involved in that also. So that's something that we're looking at, in addition to reestablishing our Mobile to New Orleans service, which was discontinued after Katrina, and that service made stops along the Mississippi Gulf Coast too. So we've got a lot going on with passenger rail, and I was very gratified today by the level of buy-in that I saw from all the principals that I mentioned a minute ago.
We're about a minute from a break, Governor, but Monday the House Appropriations Committee voted to set aside $100 million of $500 million that you have recommended for road preservation, and designate the other $400 million for work across Louisiana. Now, this is related to the new bridge. What are your thoughts about the actions in the legislature?
Well, I'm not going to have time to respond in what I have left before the break, but obviously I have very strong disagreement with them that the $500 million is the right amount. It's about 20% of the total project cost. It is the most important priority project in the state of Louisiana. It's also the most expensive. And if we don't put away significant funds now while we have them, then it's going to make it much harder to deliver that project when it becomes possible. And so I'll keep working with the legislature to restore that funding set aside to the full $500 million. Please make your
remarks as brief as possible. Let's start with Amy in Gonzales. Amy, good afternoon. You're on with Governor John Bel Edwards. Hi, Amy.
Hi, how are you guys?
Fine.
First of all, thank you, Governor, for coming to Gonzales today. I was actually in that crowd that greeted you at the stop. Looking very forward to that. I know our community is in general. But the reason for my call was really to ask, do you support the widening of Highway 30 in Ascension Parish?
Yeah, we do, and of course that's a relatively expensive project. In fact, I am going to be meeting. I know that just yesterday I received a notice from the parish president there and Parish President Contmont to meet with him to discuss Highway 30, especially with the addition of new industry. Well, the existing industry, as you know, is enough to cause significant congestion there and backups and so forth. But there's a lot of new projects that have been announced in that area as well. And we're looking at that and trying to make sure that we do it in a way that makes sense and so forth. But it is obviously something that we support and we'll be trying to move forward just as soon as we can. It won't be an inexpensive project, as you know.
Roger in Lafayette. Thank you, Amy. Roger, you're on the air with Governor Edwards. Hi, Roger.
Thank you. Governor Edwards, I'm calling again about the proposed I49 connector in Lafayette. I'm a member of a local environmental group which opposes the connector. Public meetings have only allowed limited comment or none at all. The proposed pathway of the connector is through a documented toxic waste site, the old rail yard, which threatens our aquifer and is also under litigation.
Your thoughts, Governor, about Roger's sentiments?
Yeah, but Roger, thank you for calling again. And my answer is the same as it was the first time. I support continuing the I49 between Lafayette and New Orleans. The next segments will be obviously in the Lafayette area where I49 currently stops. And I can tell you that I have personally been to Lafayette. It was early in my first term, and participated in a public meeting about I-49 and the specific route and concerns that were there relative to the rail yard and other things. But I will tell you that I-49 between Lafayette and New Orleans is extremely important. It is something that I support, and we have managed through various funding sources to put together the funding necessary for the next two segments of I-49 South, and I think that's going to be a very positive thing for the state.
James in Longview, Texas. James, good afternoon. You have the floor with Governor Edwards.
Well, good afternoon, Jim. Good afternoon, Governor. Anyhow, I was in your fine state 2 days ago going to Coshada, and on my way there, I was just on I-20 west of Shreveport, and I noticed the road signs, Alternative Energy Corridor, and I was just wondering if it would be beneficial to have a additional sign saying next charging station, say 30 miles. That way it would give drivers heads up as far as how far they had to go to recharge. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, first of all, that is a good idea, and oftentimes, as you know, electric vehicles are equipped with GPS directed, and you know, and I'm struggling to find the right words here, but you can connect to the internet and so forth, and GPS, and it'll tell you where the next charging station is. And I can tell you that's an indicator of what we're going to be doing with the funding we're receiving primarily through the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act with respect to electric vehicle charging stations. We're getting money both through USDOT, which is coming to our transportation department, but also from the EPA that's going to be coming through DEQ. And we're coordinating to make sure that we use that to leverage private dollars to get electric vehicle charging stations in important places where they wouldn't otherwise be. So if the market is going to fully incentivize the private sector to put electrical vehicle charging stations in certain locations, we don't want the public dollars to go to those same locations because we want the widest possible array of electrical vehicle charging stations as possible, as soon as possible. And we know that while it's a small segment of car sales today, it's going to grow rapidly, and in fact, by just 13 years from now, GM is saying it's not going to sell any non-electric passenger automobiles. And so that's the sort of trajectory that we have to be on. But in the meantime, I think it would be helpful to put a sign up that says where the nearest charging stations are, but those signs are going to be changed out if we do that. They're going to be changed out pretty frequently because we think that these electrical vehicle charging stations are going to be added at a rapid clip.
Your number again is 877-217-5757. Always good to hear from James in Longview. Ricky in Shreveport, I believe. Ricky, good afternoon. You're on with the governor.
Hi, Governor. Just wanted to ask, do you believe the recent Louisiana survey done by LSU highlights the growing need for the legislature and executive to work together to fund forward-thinking projects like the New Baton Rouge Bridge and passenger rail between New Orleans and Baton Rouge?
Well, I mean, the answer to that is yes, but nobody should have known that, should have needed a survey to tell us that. But I do appreciate you calling in, Ricky, and for the question. And so the LSU survey showed, very unsurprisingly, that the people of our state are very concerned about education, about infrastructure, and about the economy. And if you distill it down, the economy is really concerned about inflation. And that's permeating everything right now. People are wondering, you know, how long it's going to last, how high is it going to get, and what is it going to do to whittle away at the purchasing power of their incomes. And that's totally legitimate. On the other hand, just last week, we announced the lowest unemployment rate that we've had in Louisiana in 14 years. And the total number of people who are employed is creeping back up, getting close to the all-time high as well. But these are fears about inflation. But with respect to education and infrastructure, quite frankly, we have an opportunity, a once-in-a-generation opportunity with the budget proposals that I gave to the legislature, and I'm working with them as hard as I can every day to get them passed, where we will make record investments in our most critical priorities whether it's transportation infrastructure, roads and bridges, preservation and maintenance capacity, whether it is broadband, safe drinking water, it's coastal restoration and protection, you name it, using one-time dollars. And then on the education side, recurring dollars are such that we can invest considerably the best, I think, budget for education in a generation, with a $2,000 teacher pay raise for teachers in K through 12, faculty pay raises in higher ed, but also the largest new investment in early childhood, which I'm extremely excited about. Because the key to educating a child and setting them up for success is they need to be reading at grade level at age 3. And so you can't really affect that by your expenditures in higher ed, but you can if you're investing in early childhood. And we're doing that. We have the opportunity to do that at least, both to increase the number of quality seats available, but also to ensure that the adult in the room is top notch as well by paying them better. So we have an opportunity to address those concerns that Louisiana has expressed in that LSU survey.
Your number again is 877-217-5757. Since we last visited with the governor, the legislature overrode his veto on the congressional map, and the governor had stated on this program and elsewhere that Louisiana should, by all rights, have 2 congressional districts with majority black population, since we do have a African-American population of 33% in our state. Was it a disappointment, what happened with the override, Governor?
Sure, it was disappointing, but it wasn't surprising. I think you and I talked about this. Redistricting is the most partisan thing that the legislature does. And it's also the one thing that they do that involves the most self-interest. And so I was disappointed, not terribly surprised. I knew that was a distinct possibility. But at the end of the day, basic fairness and basic math kind of collide to let you know that if you've got a third of your state that's African-American, you've got 6 districts, then there ought to be 2 comprised of a majority of African Americans who will then have the opportunity to a meaningful opportunity to elect the person of their choice to serve in Congress. And in fact, it was possible to draw 2 majority African American districts. And so I was very disappointed. And by the way, I think the plan that was approved by the legislature violates the Voting Rights Act, and it invites judicial intervention and supervision over what we're doing here. But we shouldn't need a Voting Rights Act to tell us what's fair and right and how to do math, and we certainly shouldn't need a court to do that either. And so I am 100% at peace with the fact that I vetoed the plan. And yes, I am disappointed with the override. That's just not the best of who we are in Louisiana.
And it goes without saying that last year there was a battle royal on another veto, and the Senate yesterday, or last night, backed a measure to prohibit transgender girls and women from competing on K-12 university sports teams that match their gender identity. Now, this was a 29-6 vote. Last year, you said it was a solution in search of a problem, and you won the battle. It was a tough one, but it looks like it's headed that way again, right to your desk. What do you think?
Well, my position hasn't changed, and in the intervening year, there still hasn't been a single case of this happening in Louisiana. And for that reason, it is wholly unnecessary. And because it is unnecessary, I think that there is a certain mean-spiritedness nature to it. And obviously, I would much prefer the legislature spend its time focusing on issues that people are actually talking about around their supper tables. This is not one of them. And it's never happened in our history. The High School Athletic Association has rules in place, obviously, and so forth. And so I think it's unfortunate. We'll see what happens as that bill either does or doesn't make its way all the way through the process. But obviously my feelings on it haven't changed because the facts haven't changed.
Do you think Louisiana would have lost the Final Four if that bill had become law last year?
Well, I know that would have been a distinct possibility. I can't tell you that the NCAA for a fact would have pulled it. We know that they had put out information. They did public releases saying that states that enacted such measures would be evaluated by the NCAA as to whether they would be suitable hosts for championships to include the men's Final Four, which, by the way, I was able to attend. It was a great event, and coming just a few weeks after a very successful, safe Mardi Gras, to have a very safe, successful, well-attended men's Final Four with people coming from around the country and filling up our hotels and restaurants and so forth. It was a big shot in the arm, and I was happy to see so many people having fun in New Orleans.
Thank you for being with us for Ask the Governor on stations across the great state of Louisiana. Governor John Bel Edwards, one of the few governors in America to do this, and he has done it for 73 consecutive months. That's 6 years and 1 month consecutively. And Jerry Mayer of Hometown Productions has presented this all across the state by cable and television, so we commend him as well. And he is in studio with me, the governor joining us remotely, but he is ready for your call at 877-217-5757. Ilriana from Baton Rouge. Ilriana, you're on with Governor Edwards.
Okay, hurricane season is approaching, and many of us are weary after the last 2 years and lack of action from the federal government. My question is, what is your administration currently doing to help communities still affected by Ida and Laura, and what are you doing to prepare us for the upcoming season?
Well, first of all, thank you, Hilriana, for the question. Obviously, our state very challenged over the last couple of years during the pandemic with 5 hurricanes, and 2 of them, well, actually 3 of them, were very severe. Laura and Delta in 2020 in southwest Louisiana, and then Ida last year in southeast Louisiana. I am happy to announce that most recently the Department of Housing and Urban Development has allocated funds that were appropriated last fall, additional funds to Louisiana that brings the total appropriation for permanent housing for low to moderate income homeowners and renters, those without insurance, and some other programs as well, but to over $1 billion. That's for southwest Louisiana. And then also with respect to Ida, there is funding available that exceeds $1 billion, and of course that's going to get us started. We have an action plan that will be submitted to HUD very soon, and upon approval, we will actually start the Restore program. But in addition to that, that's all reactive to damage that's already happened. But we know that these storms appear to be getting more frequent and more severe. That certainly has been the case because Ida and Laura tied for the strongest storms ever to make landfall in Louisiana, and they hit just 1 year apart and over the last 2 years. So we're also investing record amounts in coastal restoration and protection to create a buffer between the populations of South Louisiana and the coast, $150 million in surplus alone, and then a total of $1.35 billion from the state this year. And through the IIJA and disaster supplemental last year, it's $2.6 billion that's going directly to the Corps of Engineers. And all of this is fortifying Louisiana with respect to levees and pumps and locks, you name it. But obviously, I'm also a man who believes in prayer, and I am praying that we are spared a hurricane this year because quite frankly, our folks, they are resilient and tough, and I know all of that, but we certainly don't need another hurricane this year.
Now, since we last joined you for one of these shows, Governor, a tornado cut an 11-mile path from Gretna to New Orleans East. This was amazing devastation. Fortunately, there were few fatalities, I think just one, but...
yeah, there were 2. There was one that about 10 days after the tornado was attributed to the tornado itself. It was a 22-year-old young lady, I believe, who was in a home that actually got picked up and then deposited in the street. She went to the hospital and then ultimately succumbed to injuries that were sustained. So it was two. But you're right, and the vast majority of the damage was in the area of St. Bernard Parish. I was able to tour that area with the parish president and other folks from St. Bernard, and the sheer devastation and the haphazard nature of it, if that's the right word, where you would see three homes, on the same side of the street. One of them had maybe a little bit of roof damage. One had no damage whatsoever, and the third home would just be totally destroyed. And while if you're a member of those two families who lost someone, it is extremely tragic. The fact that there were only two deaths when you saw the nature and scope of the devastation, that was something to be thankful for. But I will tell you, I'm always amazed and inspired by the goodness of the people of our state being neighbors to one another and just being generous and resilient. When I walked that neighborhood in St. Bernard Parish that day with the Archbishop of New Orleans and with Parish President Guy McGinnis, I was as inspired as I've ever been.
Derek in New Orleans. Derek, you're on with Governor Edwards. Good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon. It's an honor to speak with you again, Governor. Some of the things that was going on in the state, there's not enough forward thinking. You have the train situation that you went on today, and that's way behind. I mean, we don't have a rapid transit in this area. This is one of the major cities that doesn't have any kind of rapid transit for people. We have a lot of environmental issues. It's a shame that we have an area that's called the chemical corridor, and nothing's really being done about that. People having health issues, getting cancer. You've done an amazing job in probably saving lives since COVID started. People don't really give you enough credit.
Well, Derek,
for that.
what is your question, sir?
Okay, my question is, why aren't we doing more about recycling and trying to clean up the environment? There's a lot of damaged waterways, and I managed a startup cleaning contract at a casino in Bossier City.
All right, your thoughts about the environment?
First of all, Derek, thank you very much for calling in. And the environment is obviously important to you and to me as well. And when it comes to forward thinking, I would just remind you, our state is the only one in the Gulf South with a climate action plan. We're the only state in the Gulf South that has committed to net zero by 2050 in CO2 emissions. And we're doing everything we can as we move forward with infrastructure to do it in a way that helps us meet those climate goals, whether it's methane reduction to include by capping orphan wells, or pursuing the hydrogen hub in Louisiana, carbon capture, sequestration, wind and solar energy. I mean, you name it. And so we are doing all of those things. It's not easy. It won't happen overnight. But this energy transition is underway, and we're obviously a strong state historically with oil and gas, and we still are. But we know that over time the world will consume and demand less and less of that, and consume and demand more and more cleaner alternative energy sources, and that's what we're doing to position Louisiana for long-term success. So that we want to be an energy leader 10 years, 20 years, 50 years from now, whatever that's going to look like, and it won't look like what it has for the last 100 years, we know. So we're trying to be as forward-leaning and thinking as we can be, and I will tell you, I think that in that respect, we're doing better than many other states, especially those in the Gulf South.
These extreme weather events, and you've had to endure many. Of course, the people have endured it who have been in harm's way, but they're becoming more plentiful. Do you relate that, as many scientists do, I'd say most scientists do, to changes in the environment brought on by climate change?
I do. And first of all, I believe in science, and so when you have educated scientists who study something and there is a consensus that develops, you have to have a very strong, compelling reason to disregard that, and I certainly don't. And if you just look at what's happened, not just over the last 2 years, but over the last number of years, you see an increasing severity and frequency of storms. And quite frankly, the storms that we've been seeing most recently in Louisiana are not only the strongest ever, they're popping up in the Caribbean, and they're undergoing rapid intensification as they cross the Gulf. And that gives you a lot less warning, a lot less lead time. But what the rapid intensification is caused by are the really warm waters. And so the warmer the waters, the more energy that is fed into the storm itself, and the size and the wind speed is strengthened and so forth. And so I don't think there's any doubt, in my mind at least, that global warming is real, that human conduct is contributing to that at the very least. And that is causing an increase in the severity and frequency of storms that we have been experiencing, which is why we need to do something both on the climate side, but also with respect to coastal restoration and protection and all the other investments that we're making in order to try to protect the 2 million people in Louisiana who live and work along the coast from these storms. I just think it's imperative for us to do that if we're going to preserve our way of life here.
We will go back to the phone lines in just a moment. A few items before we get there. There are measures in the legislature to address the industrial tax exemption program, which was tweaked a few years ago, and some people are concerned that once you leave office, it'll go back to the way it was. Have the changes been, in your view, Governor, beneficial to the state and to the local communities?
Yeah, first of all, I don't think there's any doubt about that, and the program continues to be very generous and extremely successful as measured by the investments that we have received in Louisiana from manufacturing companies that are entitled to not entitled, but are eligible for the industrial tax exemption. And you know, it was operating on autopilot as a flat 100% exemption for 10 years, even though every dollar being exempted would otherwise flow to local government. Local government had no say in whether the exemption was granted, and the exemptions were not tied to jobs, either created or a compelling case for job retention. And so I think the changes that we've made to limit it to 80% to real 5-year terms, so that if they don't meet their obligations in the first 5 years, they don't get a second 5, tying it to jobs, and then allowing the locals to decide for themselves whether to grant the exemption is exactly the right thing to do. The changes have been very popular, and quite frankly, the program has been more successful under my administration than under the previous administrations, as measured by the amount of dollars being invested in Louisiana by manufacturing entities. So obviously I would prefer that these changes be put into the Constitution. Senator Rogers Pope out of Livingston Parish has a bill to do that. I would like for that to happen, but because I think that the changes do need to remain in place, and we shouldn't go back to giving away 100% exemptions for 10 years, without any tie-in to job creation and so forth. And this has been good for locals because, they are receiving more revenue from the property tax on the front end, because 20% of the assessment has to be paid in year one before the asset is depreciated, and they have to pay that over the course of the 10 years. And so they're providing education, law enforcement, fire protection, roads and bridges. Those things cost money, and when a manufacturing entity sets up shop in a parish, it actually causes the parish to incur more of those expenses, in addition to educating the children. So I think it's been the right change. I think it's been well accepted by and large across the state, and I do encourage the legislature to change the Constitution to lock in these adjustments.
All right. Now, it used to be a rite of passage that a governor of almost any state was a military veteran. Now you are in the minority. There are more governors who are not veterans than are, but I'm sure you're following what's going on, as is most of the country, what's going on in Ukraine. And even though U.S. forces are not actively fighting there, your thoughts about what has been done by the Ukrainian people to hold off the Russian army for 2 months?
Well, it's truly impressive because just the general consensus was that within a matter of days or at most weeks, the forces out of Russia were going to be able to take control of all of Ukraine and potentially install a puppet government and so forth. That not only did not happen, it appears, at least for the moment, that President Putin has given up on taking Ukraine, I should say, in its entirety and the capital city there and getting his own president installed, and he's focused now in that far eastern Donbass region, which is much smaller and has interior lines of communication and resupply back into Russia. That makes it a lot easier. But even with that, it appears he's going to have a hard time accomplishing his objectives. My best guess is that whether or not President Putin achieves any success going forward in the Donbass region, this is not going to be a strategic victory for him. He is decimating his own economy. He's uniting the West. He is causing much of Europe and the West to move away from the natural gas and oil that he's been providing them, and that's the most important thing that he can do for his economy is to continue to provide that. And so at the end of the day, I don't believe he's going to have a strategic victory. I'm just praying that Ukraine survives and that it survives intact, and that he is not rewarded in any way by this unprovoked aggression and just the very criminal nature that Russia is engaged in with respect to the way that they're waging war in Ukraine.
What do you say, Governor, to the people in our state who are paying higher prices at the pump? They're paying a lot more for some food as a result of what's happening there. That is one of the bread baskets of the world. Is that a small price to pay compared to what is happening in that country right now?
Well, it is, and if you look at the public polling, the American people say that they're willing to pay more in order to make sure that the war comes to a successful conclusion and so forth, and they understand the impact it's having. Especially, when the world cuts off access to oil out of Russia, then the supply was already insufficient, and demand continues to grow, and so the inflation at the gas pump is and by the way, that factors into everything else too, because those transportation costs get added into everything. We still have supply chain issues and so forth. But is it a small price to pay? I think it is, but the longer it goes, the more people who focus more on what they're paying and less on what the situation is in Europe. So I think it still behooves us all that matter in Europe, with respect, I should say, in Ukraine and Russia, that it be brought to a conclusion, a successful conclusion, just as soon as possible. Because we know from American history that there's that the willingness of Americans to pay more for anything is only going to last for a certain amount of time.
Steve in Baton Rouge. Hi, Steve. You're on Ask the Governor.
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking my call. My question is about, remember recently some states were considering a moratorium on collecting parts of their gasoline tax just because of the high price of gas at the pump. And I was wondering, I know we're considering adding more gas tax for infrastructure purpose. Is there any way that could be tied to a rolling average of the price of a barrel of oil?
Yeah, well, first of all, Steve, thank you very much for calling. I don't think it would be prudent to tie the gas tax to how much a barrel of oil costs or how much a gallon of gas costs, because at the end of the day, you have to produce revenue that is certain enough that you can use it to satisfy your bonding obligations, and you have to be able to meet your non-federal match obligations on the Transportation Trust Fund dollars that you get back. And those formula dollars are going to increase by $200 million each year over the next 5 years. And so the amount of federal match, non-federal match that we're going to have to come up with is actually going to be higher. And we weren't producing enough before the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act with our gas tax to draw down our full share. So it is a complicated situation, but and I don't know that this helps at all to hear it, but it's true. We have one of the oldest and lowest gas taxes in the nation, and it's 16 cents today. It was 16 cents 30 years ago, I think it was. And we haven't increased it to keep up with inflation and so forth. So hopefully that provides some comfort, but the price of gas is still very high. I'm aware of that, but we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to address long-standing critical infrastructure needs, including capacity projects and maintenance and preservation projects, but we have to have the non-federal match in order to be able to get that. That non-federal match is generated by the gas tax, and in fact, we're having to augment that with other funding sources as well.
We only have a minute to go, but Stuart in Baton Rouge, please be brief. You're on the air with the governor.
Certainly, Governor Jim and the audience, good afternoon. Governor, do you see a day where all law enforcement personnel across the United States, particularly those in backwood parishes, will be forced to wear body cameras and produce the evidence from them? Because I ask this, Governor, because as an African-American male, in many instances, even when you are completely compliant, officers approach you and manage the interaction very disrespectfully.
Your thoughts, Governor, about Stuart's remarks?
Well, first of all, we've done that with the state police. So patrol officers have to wear and then engage their body cameras. And in fact, if they fail to do so, that is now an offense that they can be terminated for. I think it protects both law enforcement officers and the general public. Now, whether we're going to force that on, a village police officer, a city police officer, a sheriff's deputy, I think that's the first time I've had anybody ask about that. I don't know that we would ever force it without providing the funding to make it happen. It's something that we can consider, but quite frankly, I don't know that we'll ever do it, forcing it on others, but we have done it at the Louisiana State Police.
Governor, thank you for joining us. We'll be back again in May. Hopefully the governor will be in studio, and we'll have much to talk about, as always. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jim, and go Pelicans.
There you go. They're doing well. And until next time, for Jeff Palermo, I'm Jim Inkster. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned.